Good evening. We are coming to you live from the WFMY News 2 studio after an historic day where we learned that President Biden will no longer be running for re-election. Obviously, there are so many lingering questions after today's announcement. We have asked Thom Little to join us for some perspective. He's a political science expert from UNCG. Thom, thank you so much for joining us. The first natural question, were you surprised to hear the news today?
I was surprised to hear it today. I was not surprised to hear it. You know, a week ago everybody said he's going to stay, and then you start hearing some rumors. The wind is shifting, sands are shifting, more people are coming out. When Nancy Pelosi kind of came out and some of the bigger names in the party, I'm a little surprised that it came out today. I thought it'd be sometime this week by the end of the month, but not today.
So we know that, it was just a couple of minutes after President Biden posted on social media that he endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris to fill that role within the Republican National, the Democratic National Convention coming up here. Is that surprising to you?
No, I think as his VP, I think there was sort of an obligation, expectation. I also think what he wanted to avoid is an open convention. You know, going in there with no front runner, since there's only 2 weeks out from the convention, would have been very, very difficult. So I think he's trying to avoid that. She's also, being the vice president, she has a national organization. There are a lot of good candidates out there, but they don't have a national organization, and you can't put that together in 3 weeks. So I think she was a natural selection. Not surprised he endorsed her.
You know, while watching some of the CBS programming earlier today, some of their special report coverage, they had mentioned that Kamala Harris will still have access to the money that the party has raised, but that a different candidate would not.
Right, because that money was raised for the Biden-Harris ticket, and so Harris is still on there. Absolutely. So she comes in with tremendous financial advantage as well.
And so what do you expect to see happen over the coming days, well before the DNC meets for their party?
You know, it's hard to predict, but I anticipate most Democrats coming out in the next few days supporting her soundly. I think a lot of them have not come out today. They want this to be Joe Biden's day. This day is about 50 years of public service from Joe Biden. This is about somebody who's committed their life to public service in this country. I think they want Joe Biden to have his day. But once that's done, I think you will see more and more of them coming out behind Vice President Harris.
We've seen a lot of people just commenting on social media and some of these different special reports on TV. What are your thoughts on the idea that Vice President Kamala Harris is the natural pick for a lot of people, but then others are saying that she just can't win?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it that way, I don't know that every poll I've seen has her as close as Biden, maybe a little bit better. And to say somebody can't win in July for a November election, I think it's quite a bit premature. Now, the only poll I've seen somebody that could soundly beat him was Michelle Obama. She's not going to run. So to say, well, we can't pick her because she can't win based on polls up through July, it doesn't make any sense. You don't have any natural person that you can go out there and say, well, this person we know can win, except Michelle Obama, and she's not going to run. So I don't see that making a difference. And again, this is July. A lot can happen between now and then. And the fact that she's been vice president, there's still a lot of people that don't know much about her that will be introduced to her. Now, the interesting thing is who's going to be able to set the narrative. Republicans will say she was not the party's choice. You know, she was just vice president. She had been very effective, they'll argue, as vice president. She was in charge of immigration, one of the policy areas that she was given by President Biden. Obviously, that has not gone the way Democrats have wanted. So they're going to try to paint her as someone who's ineffective and chosen in an undemocratic manner. Democrats, on the other hand, are going to say, now, this is the person, Joe Biden chose her knowing that if something happened to him, she would be president. He believed she was ready to be president. She has been a senator. She has been Attorney General of the largest state in the country. She was a prosecutor. She's articulate. She's young. She's dynamic. They're going to try to paint that narrative that she's the next generation.
Knowing that it still could be a couple of days, weeks before we know who the actual nominee will be for the Democrats, could this get ugly?
It could, but I don't anticipate it. Again, it's such short notice. I think everybody in the Democratic Party, their number one goal is to win the election. And even if they believe she may not be the strongest candidate, whoever they chose, if they chose him in a contested, combative way, would be weakened. And I think they want to show unity behind whoever it is. And the easiest person to get unity behind right now is Kamala Harris, the vice president.
No surprise that we saw a short list today for possible running mates. Some might be surprised that Governor Cooper's name was on that list. You know, one of the very few people whose name has been floated around. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would be surprised, but not shocked. You know, when there was talk that Biden might step down, or even 2 years ago after the 22 election, people started talking about 24. If Biden didn't run, there was talk of Cooper as a possible VP. I don't think Cooper ever entertained being the presidential candidate, but putting North Carolina in play, and that's some electoral votes that would be useful. Don't know if it would. That the Harris ticket could win North Carolina with him on the ticket, but it would make it much more competitive. So I think, and you have to realize Governor Cooper's never lost a statewide election in the state. I don't think he's ever lost an election in the state. I have to go back. Pretty sure he didn't lose to the House and the Senate, North Carolina's House and Senate, and we know he never lost in running statewide. So he's a very strong candidate, would put North Carolina in play. I do think that is smart for whoever they pick. You would want them to be somebody that would bring a couple things to the table. One would bring experience, and he has been governor for 8 years, attorney general before that. He brings a lot of good experience. Would also bring a state closer to the Democratic Party, even if it doesn't win. You know, another one I've heard is Kentucky's Governor Beshear, possibility. Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan. Particularly Michigan, I think, in my mind, is a really intriguing state because it went for Biden last time, but not by a lot. There have been some movement away from him in the unions, which are prominent in Michigan. The only challenge there is I don't know if America's ready for a ticket with 2 women on it, frankly. We would just have to see, but I think Whitmer would be a great choice. Cooper would be a good choice. Right now, it's interesting. It seems like most of the strong Democratic candidates, the bench is at the governor's mansions. You got Newsom in California, you got Fitzer in Illinois, you got Beshear in Kentucky, you got Cooper here, you got Whitmer. So it's interesting. I suspect she would pick one of those, but who knows? I think the key is she's got to pick somebody that brings some votes to the table because it is going to be a close election. And right now, polling does have her a little bit behind. If she could put somebody on that locks in a state that that Democrats would not have otherwise won, I think that'd be really useful for her.
You know, when we saw the short list, and you'd mentioned it, basically everyone's a governor. Why governors and not U.S. representatives or senators or anybody else? You
know, it's interesting. It almost like it goes through cycles. You know, there was a time when it was almost all senators: John Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson. Then you had then went to governors. Then you had Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan. George W. Bush, you know, it was like it was governors. It's interesting, I think we've moved in the direction of governors because governors have been an executive before. And in the past, you know, 50 years ago, it was hard to get national attention, but if you're governor of Illinois or California, these large states, on the Republican side, you're hearing it, Abbott in Texas, governor in Florida. The larger states have a national platform, but also a governor can prove that they have been an executive. The reality is right now life in the Senate and the U.S. Congress is frustrating. There's very little action. This last Congress did pass the least number of bills of any Congress in U.S. history. So if you're running from Congress, what do you got to brag about? What do you got to say? Well, I've done this, because nothing's been done. The Senate at a 51-49 split gets nothing done. So it's hard to run as a senator because you have no record. But a governor, particularly in good times, you know, again, Cooper has managed to be a quite effective governor over 7.5 years. He's got a record to run saying, we passed this, the economy of North Carolina has done this, we created this many jobs, education has done this. Governors generally have a record to run on, where senators and members of the U.S. House, it's much more difficult nowadays. And again, 50 years ago that was different. 50 years ago the action was in Washington. And so you had John Kennedy, you had Lyndon Johnson, you had people from the Senate running. Harry Truman came from Congress. But as the national governments become more noted for gridlock, you have less and less opportunity to stand out in the Senate and House. So I think most states are looking toward their governors now.
I imagine specifically in our state, a lot of down ballot races either could be impacted, will be impacted, or people are worried that they will be impacted by this.
Absolutely. I mean, I think no matter who the nominee is, Democrats have suffered from a lack of enthusiasm for Biden. You may like him, you may like what he's done, but you're just not excited about it. I do think you will see a tremendous bump in enthusiasm. And again, that's where I kind of discount the polls a little bit. Polls that show, I just saw one a while ago, I think it had Trump 51 and Harris 49. One is July, doesn't mean a lot. Second thing is that doesn't tell you who's going to go out to vote. If some, that 51% is people that are really enthused, and the 49 is people who, well, I'd vote for, but I may not go out to vote. That makes a difference. I think you're going to see a tremendous bump in enthusiasm for a new candidate, whether it's Harris or somebody else or whatever that ticket is. And that will affect, that means some of those people that maybe would not have voted for Biden and probably not for Trump, they would have stayed home. Well, if they stayed home, that vote doesn't go to Josh Stein. That vote doesn't go to Lieutenant Governor Rachel Hunt. So those people that all of a sudden are going to come out to vote that would have stayed home, those will help the down ballot. And I do think you're going to see an enthusiasm bump. You're going to see an infusion of money into the Democratic Party. As I'm sure you know, over the last week, a lot of Democratic funders have said, we're not funding a Biden ticket. Now that's gone. You're going to see a lot more activity from women's groups, from people of color organized groups to get behind Harris. And so I think you're going to see an influx of money. You're going to see an influx of enthusiasm. I think outside of North Carolina, the other state that intrigues me now is Georgia. Biden won Georgia by, I think, 13,000, very few votes. He was running behind, but I think with Harris on the ticket, an African-American candidate, you will see a bump in enthusiasm in votes around Atlanta and Fulton County and Cobb County. And that, I think, puts Atlanta back in play, puts Georgia back in play, may put Arizona back in play, and states that the Democrats really need to win. The interesting thing is and this is where she might be wise to pick somebody with Midwestern ties, because I think even if she wins Arizona and Georgia, she needs to pick up one of three of the blue wall. She's got to pick up either Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, or Michigan, or two of those would be good. Biden's been running consistently behind. He's been close in Wisconsin, but particularly in his home state of Pennsylvania. She's going to need to, or whoever the nominee is going to need to pick up at least one of those. So and I think that's why Vance is on the Republican ticket, to try to turn those back to the Republican. Does she pick, and that's where like a Brashear, who's in Kentucky, which some would call Midwestern, some call Southern, but I think it's close enough to the Midwest that it might help her. Be interesting to see if she can do that and pick up those states.
If you're the Trump campaign, are you more excited for a run against Kamala Harris, or were you still kind of hoping that it was going to be Joe Biden?
Oh, you're absolutely hoping it was Biden. No question. You'll have noticed Trump has had very little to say in the last week while this is going on. And it's interesting, I think that the Republicans are probably primarily to blame for this happening, because they have been the ones for 6 months that's saying he was incompetent, that he's not capable. And it's funny, it's ironic now that he has come out and said, you know what, I need to step down. They're the ones saying we're going to push lawsuits that he has to stay on the ticket, because some states you can't take somebody off the ticket. Now, I think absolutely they were prepared for a run against Joe Biden, and now they're trying to figure out what to do. Now, they'll still, it doesn't mean they're not going to win, but it's dramatically changed the nature of this race. This whole race was going to be, for them, about two things: immigration and Joe Biden's competence. It will still be about immigration. You will not see a Republican ad in the next 3 months that does not talk about immigration. Just like on the Democratic side, you won't see an ad that doesn't talk about abortion. That's where this battle's going to be fought. But it was also going to be about competence and going to be about the questions. And you can just see the clips they would show from the debate. They've got plenty of ammunition. That's the race they were planning to run. Now they got to figure out, now they've got plenty of ammunition, and they've already started. They've already talked about Harris not being democratically selected, how she's only been in the Senate, and the immigration issue. They've already started attacking Whitmer. They've started attacking some of this. It might be the VP. So they've got plans, but the Republicans they were a lot happier yesterday than they are today.
As us, just everyday people, just hanging out in North Carolina, living our lives, what should we expect to see over the next couple of weeks and months as a direct result of what happened today?
Yeah, I think you're going to see the Democratic Party scrambling to get behind Harris. And they're going to have to, the Republicans, whether you liked the message or not of their convention, they put on a good show. They had, they had actors. They had, obviously, they had political folks, but they got Hulk Hogan up there ripping off his shirt. They put on a very good production. Democrats have now got to retool. They were going to have a Biden show. Now, what do? They got 3 weeks to retool for 4 days of a national convention, besides making sure who the nominee is going to be in between there. So what we're going to see, it's not going to affect your life and my life on the ground, but behind the scenes, and if you're a party operative right now, it's going to be crazy. What are they going to do? Do they have some kind of, they've used the term mini primary. I don't even understand how that could function in 2 weeks, but do they have some kind of process so that it can sort of mute that Republican response that this has been an undemocratically elected person? Can they have some kind of vote before the convention that says, no, she was indeed chosen by the party? You're going to see some scrambling, because I do think when Democrats have been arguing this entire campaign that that Trump is a threat to democracy, and then they come on and say, well, they just chose somebody by a process that wasn't democratic, that's going to mute one of their most powerful voices, their most powerful arguments. So I think they're going to try to figure out some way to say, no, she got the votes. Now, one of the ways is when you were voting for Joe Biden, you were really voting for Kamala Harris because they were a team. I think that's going to be one of their arguments, that yes, indeed, she did get the votes. She wasn't running against him. It wasn't like one of the other candidates running in the primary, that when you were voting for Joe Biden, you were also voting for Kamala Harris because she was going to be the team. I think they make that argument, but I also think they try to come up with some way, whether it is some kind of online vote of delegates, some way to say, no, she did earn this nomination. And you'll notice that's what she said today. I will be honored, I will work to earn your nomination. She doesn't want it to be a coronation either, because that will mute one of their major arguments. As
she is, ascending to this probable role of the candidate for president for the Democratic Party, what would it take to derail that? Is it as simple as one person, a Democrat, saying, I want to challenge her?
I don't think so. She's going to, whoever it is has to get the votes at the convention. They have to get a majority of the delegates. Well, it's over 3,000 delegates. They've got to get a majority of those. Again, I was reading that there is a process in place. In order to be considered, you have to get, and I may have this, either 600, I believe it was 600 signatures of 600 of those delegates to even be considered. So somebody can't just walk in there and say, I'm throwing my name in the hat. And again, I think the prominent people, Whitmer's already said she was not going to challenge. Fitzer from Illinois is not going to challenge. The names that you've heard bantered around, I don't know about Newsom if he said anything yet. But again, I think the prize for Democrats is beating Trump. And if it is perceived that somebody who comes along and makes these challenges is going to divide the party, that's going to be a problem. So I don't see a process for somebody. It's possible, but I don't really see a path for anybody else, because she does have his endorsement, national organization that nobody else has, and access to all of the Biden-Harris money. So I really don't see a way that she would not be the nominee.
If you could predict how quickly before we know who a VP pick would be?
I don't think they'll announce that till the convention.
Okay, so a month.
Yeah, so it's 19th, so yeah, it's a month from, yesterday?
2 days ago.
Yeah. So I suspect that might be opening night of the convention. Because there's going to be first they got to make sure she's going to be the nominee before they pick. But I would be surprised if it's before the convention, unless they're looking for some kind of bump to kind of get attention before the convention. But again, I think there's going to be so much going on, they'll have plenty of attention.
Sure. A lot of good insight. Thom Little, political expert from UNCG, great guy. Thank you for coming in.
Enjoyed it.
Appreciate it on a Sunday. Thank you. Yeah. And that's going to do it for us here. We will have much more of our coverage tonight on WFMY News 2 at 11. Have a good night.